Hey, you don't know who I am, and that's quite all right. I get it. Sometimes I like to stare into a mirror and ask that forlorn reflection, who are you? I don't matter, but I feel this story does, and I thought what better way to raise awareness of an important issue than to tempt a multi-billion-dollar company into a frivolous intellectual property lawsuit. Come at me, Habo, if you have any haballs. Medicaid estate recovery. Now you might be thinking, I recognize all three of those words as being in English, but this nerd looks really concerned as to their proximity, and I am. What a lot of people don't know is that Medicaid isn't free health care. It's a loan, and states are keeping tabs on every expense, and they want to get it back. They will go so far as to take an entire person's estate after their death, leaving their children without an inheritance, and that is up to and including the family home, which makes states' Medicaid programs less of a Mother Teresa and more of a, let's say, Shooter McGavin.
Now, you lay another finger on me, I burn the house down and piss on the ashes.
Now, there are ways to secure assets from the government. One could put property into an irrevocable trust, or you could transfer the deed, but that would require you knowing that you needed to do that. Medicaid estate recovery is in the finest of print. In Massachusetts, for example, it's buried on page 20 out of 36 in Medicaid's version of their terms of service. And listen, I know terms of service jokes are kind of outplayed at this point since that South Park episode, so we'll skip any. But I just want to say that given the context of what we're talking about, and depending on a person's health, if they don't accept the agreement, they could die. And also, if they try to move assets or transfer ownership after signing up for Medicaid, they can lose their eligibility. And now you would think something like this would have more press, but in my search, I was only able to find 2 segments that ever made it to broadcast. One of which I really didn't want to find. Just play it.
Well, some serious new concerns about Obamacare as the law's fine print reveals millions of people newly qualified to receive so-called free health care under Medicaid may be on the hook for every dime after they die. Dan Stringer is live in Seattle with a story that might surprise you. Dan?
Yeah, it sure will, John. It's called estate recovery, and it's been around since Congress passed a law way back in 1993 when states were frankly going broke over the rising Medicaid costs. But now under Obamacare, there will be many more people affected. 6 million more people are eligible for Medicaid. Many of them own a home and may even have other assets. States are allowed to keep a running tab on all your Medicaid bills from age 55 to 64, and after your death can attach a lien on your estate.
Have to make a quick addendum here, shocker. You heard him mention that they keep track between the ages of 55 and 64, and that's a little misleading. You see, at age 65, that's when you can get on to Medicare, but in case you didn't know, Medicare doesn't cover everything, and whatever it doesn't cover is covered then by Medicaid. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. Illnesses such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, whose needs often fall under, quote, custodial rather than, quote, medical care, and who therefore largely denied coverage by Medicare as well. Now, with that in mind, let's wrap up this Fox segment.
Now, the amount of money we're talking about could be huge. In 2004, states collected $361 million through estate recovery. $44 million of that was in California alone. Now, under Obamacare, the Golden State is expecting 1 to 2 million more people in its Medicaid program. And it's going to continue the practice of collecting as much as it's allowed by law. And unlike in the past, when most Medicaid recipients were poor and or disabled, we're finding plenty of people who have serious assets but not a high income. One guy here in the Seattle area told us he wants no part of Medicaid.
I did not want to be on Medicaid because it's supposed to be a safety net program. It's not supposed to be for somebody who has assets that can pay the bill. I used to pay the bill. I didn't want money from the government for that.
And get this, we also found a couple in their 60s that got married to stay out of Medicaid. Individually, they qualified, but their combined income allowed them to buy a plan on the exchange. Why'd they do it? Well, the woman owns a home and wants to will it to her children free and clear from Uncle Sam. John?
So you get death and taxes, and then taxes after death.
After death, yeah, you got it.
Only this government could concoct something like that. Dan Springer, thank you.
Yep.
I know. What concoct suckers. Now keep in mind, his colleague just said 2 minutes ago that this was enacted in '93, proving my long-held theory that Fox News anchors are secretly goldfish. You know what, it actually is feeding time. Good thing I got some dandruff flakes from the late Ronald Reagan. Just go in and just give it, Dan, share, don't hog it, let it trickle down. Now, despite the obvious anti-Obama spin on this piece, it is a worthy story to point out. It is significant that the Affordable Care Act consequently expanded the reach of estate recovery. And, you know, I don't want to give Fox too much credit here. I think it's a lot like the infinite monkey theory. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. There's this idea that if you give infinite monkeys a typewriter, eventually one of them will write the entire works of Shakespeare. To be Nana, or not to be Nana? That is the question. And, you know, I think that translates rather well here. Because if you give Goldfish a 24-hour news network, eventually they're going to get one thing right. Still, could we maybe get a more unbiased story? Is that possible? Oh, we do have one. Great, let's do it up.
Next story is about Medicaid. The government health insurance program recently expanded to millions of Americans. Although often considered free health insurance for the poor, federal law requires Medicaid to charge recipients for certain services, and they are sometimes billed after they die. Medicaid then charges the expenses to their leftover assets. It's called estate recovery, and it's making many people think twice. Sally Schilling, a student at the University of California, Berkeley Journalism School, brings us the story.
The rollout of the Affordable Care Act and the expansion of Medicaid brought hope to people like Ruth and Rod Morgan, who had gone without health insurance for 10 years.
When I heard about the Affordable Care Act, we were very excited. We were finally going to have health coverage.
The Morgans live in Stockton, California. They're in their early 60s and are retired, aside from Rod's occasional construction jobs.
We were pretty much forced into retirement because of the economic downturn. There just wasn't any work.
And I mean, we don't have much, but I would love to give our kids something. You know, I'd like to leave them a little something when we're gone.
In states that have opted to expand Medicaid, like California, anyone making $16,000 or less per year now qualifies for Medicaid. But the Morgans were hesitant to sign up for California's Medicaid program, Medi-Cal. They had heard that Medi-Cal would bill their estate after they die.
The first person I asked about estate recovery when we started to sign up said, oh, we can't possibly charge you, do something like that for you on an insurance policy that we are forcing you to have.
With that reassurance, the Morgans signed up.
And then weeks later, we got a letter in the mail saying, congratulations, you qualify for Medi-Cal. Yes. And then on the back page, this little paragraph says that you are subject to estate recovery and do not contact your social worker about this.
Just to interject here, so again, estate recovery was made mandatory in '93 during the Clinton administration to try and mitigate the growing cost of Medicaid. Boomers were projected to bankrupt the system as the eldest of their generation would reach their 70s by 2017. But it's important to remember here that it was made mandatory in '93. It existed prior to that. Now, every state is different, just like every state's Medicaid's different. You know, some didn't want to pursue it at all, but they were threatened with getting their Medicaid funding cut. Michigan, for example, was one of the last ones to enact it, and that was in 2007. Now, some states pursue the bare minimum, while others go for everything and the kitchen sink. West Virginia legislators called estate recovery abhorrent, which, yeah, I know. Someone in West Virginia knows the word abhorrent. I mean, They must have all chipped in. I thought they only spoke in fragments of the John Denver song, Take Me Home Country Roads. Good on you, mountain mamas.
Medi-Cal's managed care premiums are typically hundreds of dollars per month, but recipients aren't notified of how much money is being spent on them. Rod says he asked a Medi-Cal representative how much money he was accruing.
And she said, oh, we don't have any idea. We don't figure that out until after you die.
Heirs could receive a hardship waiver, but only if they can show their parents' Medicaid bill would cause an undue hardship, or that they were a caretaker for their parents in the family home. Joanne Bell lives in Oakland, California, in the home her grandparents purchased in the 1940s. It was here that she cared for her mother with Alzheimer's.
Where I went, she went. We had a wonderful time.
Bell put her mother in adult daycare while she went to work. Her mother's care was covered by Medi-Cal. Her mother passed away in 2012.
And then I got, bam, this letter from the state of California saying, oh, you owe us $54,000. I was like, what?
Bell applied for a hardship waiver. But because the family home was entrusted to her and her 3 brothers, the state only waived her quarter of the recovery fees. The state now has a lien on the house for $43,000 at 7% interest. She worries she might have to sell the family home to pay off Medi-Cal.
Now listen, yes, Medicaid is expensive, but that's mostly due to how overpriced medical care is in this country. And I don't want to get into the medical industrial complex in this video. I'm going to leave the heavy stuff for Papa John. No, not that Papa, the other Papa. Yes, that Papa. Now, one may be of the mind, yeah, this is terrible, but we got to get that money back somehow. But here's the thing, estate recovery isn't even an effective program. Here's another chunk from The Atlantic. In 2005, AARP published a study of the first decade of mandatory estate recovery. In Massachusetts, it found recovered an average of $16,442 per estate in 2003, in total offsetting a little more than 1% of its long-term care costs that year. That made its effort among the most effective in the nation. In Kentucky, by contrast, the average amount collected from an estate was $93, which is 0.25% of its long-term care cost. States recouped from $72 million in 1996 to $347 million 7 years later, but even so, estate recoveries accounted for less than 1% of Medicaid's total nursing home costs in 2003. Yeah, less than 1%. And also, seriously, what the fuck is going on in Kentucky? Where are you hiding the valuables, Mitch? Are you hiding jewels in your jowls? Spit them out! Spit them out! Spit them out! Good boy. So here's the thing, too. By recovering so little, what we've essentially done is valued human suffering like it's a $5 movie bin. The piece from The Atlantic touches on a few. Tawanda Rhodes, we mentioned a piece of her story earlier, but it goes into much more depth in the article, which, again, I can't urge you enough to read. But there's also Treva Baldwin's family. Treva lost her battle with cancer when she was 1 year shy of being able to qualify for Medicare, but because she was on Medicaid, the state wants to collect. There's also Lisa Musgrave, who will become homeless when the state forecloses on her mother's property. And, you know, these are just snowflakes on the tip of the iceberg. You know, there has to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of stories like these that just go unheard. There is this really amazing line in the piece by Rachel Corbett, who we've been reciting up and down throughout this thing, and you know, she briefly talks about how she and her family are among those affected by estate recovery, and I'd just like to read from a piece of it. Unlike Tawanda Rhodes, my brother and I don't live in the house, nor do our futures depend on inheriting it. but in a country that protects the passage of intergenerational wealth for its most privileged sons and daughters, there's a special indignity to having to fight for a trailer, or $93, or a shack at the edge of an Iowa cornfield that's of virtually no value to the government, but has meant everything to us. As my wealthier peers in New York inherit summer houses, art collections, and trusts, the rich is maximized by an ever-eroding estate tax. It compounds the sense of shame my mother feels in failing to leave her children with even a modest leg up. And in knowing that, had she been better informed, she might have prevented it all. And hey, fun fact, I'm also from Iowa. You know, when I was calling the other around to different states' Medicaid departments, I was informed by an incredibly helpful gentleman from Alabama that Iowa is the apparent gold standard in terms of estate recovery. All I could say was, no kidding. I didn't disclose that my family experienced that gold star excellence with my grandmother when my grandmother passed away, nor that I'll inevitably experience it again with my mother. But this isn't about Ms. Corbett or myself. We already won by getting out of state. A lot of people don't know this, but Iowa is the oldest and largest escape room in America. Here's a hint for those stuck on the last puzzle. The key is in the anus of the State Fair butter cow sculpture. The real challenge is getting past security, but man, once you're in there, you can just slide right in. Now, there is a time-sensitive reason as to why I'm bringing this up now. According to data from the CDC, 95% of deaths from COVID are of people over 50, which means there's a greater probability that they've been on Medicaid for a long enough time to accrue debt that could forfeit any inheritance that could possibly be passed on to their children. Prior to COVID, I would wager that most would have lived an additional decade or two, potentially a long enough time for their children to reach, hopefully, the next economic level. But having a home is an essential asset to achieve that in many cases. Beyond take just my word for it or the Atlantic. Here's Patricia McGinnis. She knows what she's talking about.
Having a home is one of the key factors in being able to escape poverty.
Pat McGinnis, the executive director of California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform, says estate recovery hurts the people who need inheritance the most.
What you're doing, again, destabilizing low-income communities and creating a cycle of poverty that people will never get out. The money we collect from the Medicaid recovery program is a drop in the bucket. It's absolutely nothing compared to the misery and the burdens that it causes on the economy. So somehow we can't seem to get that through to the finance people for the governor.
And she's absolutely right. There are so many variables. Person X could use their family home while putting themselves through school. Person Y could sell their parents' home when they passed away to jumpstart their family. We could rattle off examples all day. But the fact is, Medicaid estate recovery ultimately removes opportunities to escape poverty and therefore increases poverty. Now, instead of finding a real solution to the cost of Medicaid, like say, make the wealthiest among us pay a proper tax rate, drop a few less bombs overseas, or maybe just rein in the medical industrial complex. Why not? How about if we try all three? Maybe a little bit of all three. Let's just do a little bit of all three, just to see if we like it. I bet we will. But instead of doing that, the government has opted to continue punishing the poor and middle class for being poor and middle class. So, what can be done? Well, if nothing else, if you or someone you know is about to get on Medicaid, call a lawyer in your state to see how you can protect yourself. But what would be even better would be to pressure the Biden administration to not only remove the mechanism that made this thing mandatory back in '93, but to go further and give a federal order instructing the states to cease any current and future cases. And if any of them give any lip, threaten to cut their Medicaid funding, just as they were threatened to have their funding cut if they didn't pursue estate recoveries. Now, it may be too late for families like mine, or Ms. Corbett's, or Tawanda Rhodes, or the others that you've heard here in this. But if we can stop this from happening to just one more future family, it would absolutely be worth it. Just for the commonwealth of this country. As is, without action, you're giving multiple generations of people a legitimate cause and reason to believe that the government is an antagonist. But hey, what's the worst that can happen with that? That's the video.